Once Russia's wealthiest man with an estimated net worth of $15 billion, ranked 16th on the Forbes list of billionaires in 2003, to being arrested and serving 10 years in prison. Today, he's lost a vast portion of it all, and is now exiled in London as a living Putin critic. Yes, he's actually alive. This is Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a controversial Russian businessman who rose to prominence after the dissolution of the Soviet Union by establishing various businesses as well as profiting from the privatization of state-owned entities during Russia's first President Boris Yeltsin's government loans for share scheme. $15 billion. What happened to it all? Welcome to Gauging Productry, where we provide you abridgment films. Today, we'll be covering Mr. Khodorkovsky's story. Mikhail Borisovich Khodorkovsky, or MBK, was born on the 26th of June 1963 in Soviet Union Moscow. Unlike most childhood stories of people I cover here, Mikhail was raised by two working-class parents who were employed as engineers at a factory making measuring instruments. They resided in a two-bedroom flat in the suburbs of Moscow, so you could say he experienced a stable and modest upbringing. Mikhail displayed early signs of intelligence, achieving good grades during his scholar years. By his early adult years, he would be elected deputy head of Komsomol, a political youth organization in the Soviet Union. He occupied this position at the D. Mendeleev University of Chemical Technology of Russia. During his university years, Mikhail would get married to a woman named Elena, and would welcome a son, Pavel Khodorkovsky, in 1985, the man pictured on the right. In 1986, Mikhail would meet his current spouse, 18-year-old Anna Khodorkovsky, who attended the same university as he did. She was also part of the Komsomol, and they welcomed a daughter, Anastasia, and sons Ilya and Gleb, throughout their marriage. Mikhail would graduate with a degree in chemical engineering that year, and right after graduation he would begin working for the Komsomol full-time. By being part of this youth organization, he would display his passion for politics, as this was a typical way of entering a Soviet political career. He spent several years working for the organization, expecting to be appointed in a junior position in city management, someplace far from the capital, but this never occurred. This would lead to Mikhail trying his shot in business. Partners he met in Komsomol would assist him in opening a private cafe in 1986. This was launched with the assistance of the Perestroika and Glasnost program. Perestroika is a political reform movement within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This restructured the political and economic systems in an attempt to end the era of stagnation. Glasnost is a concept relating to openness and transparency, maximizing the activities of state institutions and freedom of information and the admissibility of hushing up problems. This was introduced by then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Perestroika would empower businessmen like Khodorkovsky, who would use his connections within the communist structure to gain a favorable position in the developing free market. He launched his business activities under the cover of Komsomol. Friendship with another Komsomol leader, Alexei Golubovich, would prove useful on his growing success, as Mr. Golubovich's parents held top positions in Gazbank, the central bank of the Soviet Union. Khodorkovsky would be involved in various businesses, comprising of importing personal computers as well as venturing into finance, though his big break wouldn't come until 1987, where he and his partners opened a center that traded various products, which provided the foundation for the launch of Bank Menatep. Menatep was attached to the Komsomol committee in the Moscow district. Bank of New York employees, of whom were closely associated with Bruce Rappaport, an international bank and financier, worked very closely with Khodorkovsky and Bank Menatep, assisting the private bank to list its stock in the United States. Through such networks, a banking license would be obtained. Bank Menatep would officially begin banking in 1989. It would expand quite quickly due to being one of Russia's first privately owned banks. Khodorkovsky allegedly used some of the bank's deposits raised to finance import-export operations. Questionable, but profitable. Bank Menatep would be granted the rights to manage the funds allocated for the victims of the Chernobyl nuclear accident from 1986. The dissolution of the Soviet Union would occur in 1991, a historic moment. The Russian Federation would be born, and the man leading it would be President Boris Yeltsin, the man who birthed the oligarchs, which I'll touch on in a moment. During this period, Khodorkovsky was at his busiest. The man was everywhere, getting a slice in every pie. And by 1992, he would be appointed chairman of the Investment Promotion Fund of the fuel and power industry, whilst dabbling in currency trading and raking millions from it. He bought up privatization vouchers, documents that were distributed to every Russian citizen, entitling them to a share of the national wealth, which many Russians were happy to trade at a discount for ready cash. Khodorkovsky was appointed Deputy Minister of Fuel and Energy of Russia in March 1993. On the other end, Yukos Oil Company was created a month later, on April 15th, by the Russian government, following a presidential decree from November 1992. The decree directed the government to transfer its directly owned oil and gas operations into separate companies, in preparation for privatization, with the aim of developing the oil and gas sector in Russia. Yukos was one of those companies. Khodorkovsky couldn't have possibly been in a better position during this period. A subsidiary in St. Petersburg was founded by the Moscow bank Menatep, under the name of Menatep St. Petersburg. The commercial bank was registered by the Central Bank of the Russian Federation on November 27. It had a general license of the Central Bank of Russia to conduct banking operations. Perfect timing. The establishment of the Menatep subsidiary seemed to be allowed for bigger plans, as Russia staged its greatest property giveaway ever during the year of 1995. The government scrapped communism. Large state companies had been abandoned, variously restructured, or looted by their own executives. The oligarchs, of which included Khodorkovsky, lent to the government money against collateral consisting of blocks of stock that amounted to controlling interests in those companies. What is an oligarch? Well, according to Wikipedia, an oligarch is a very rich business leader with a great deal of political influence, particularly with reference to individuals who benefited from the privatization of state-run industries after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Back to the story. The oligarchs knew that the government would eventually default and that the firms would thus pass into their hands. This is how the Yeltsin administration privatized oil, gas, manufacturing, and other enterprises without parliamentary approval. Russia was in economic difficulty at the time. The Yeltsin administration would go right ahead and privatize large state-owned businesses in a second round of reorganization called loans for shares, where major state assets were sold off through mainly Russian commercial banks in a series of rigged auctions whose participants were limited to people with political connections. President Yeltsin was headed towards re-election. Funding and propaganda was essential, as anti-Yeltsin protests had begun. The oligarchs would provide the funding and propaganda on television networks, news articles, and other political means. A massacre would ensue among Russian businessmen and politicians. People were threatened, tortured, kidnapped. Contracts were given out to hitmen to take out certain individuals. The country was literally up for sale at a huge discount, and people's true intentions began to show. Yukos Oil Company, based in Moscow, would be one of the companies put up for auction. Remember I said Khodorkovsky's bank had been aligned? Well, it was one of the banks contending for Yukos, and surprise surprise, it was the one managing the auction. At this point chaired by 32-year-old co-founder, Khodorkovsky, who at the time had founded and was CEO of Rosneft, an investment holding company created to manage Menatep's portfolio of around 30 large industrial companies. Menatep would win a two-stage auction in December 1995 and became the 78% owner of Yukos' share stake. Khodorkovsky would occupy the CEO chair, and from 1997, he'd be chairman. Just phenomenally played. In October, Group Menatep Limited, a $29 billion financial holding company, would be established and controlled by 6 Russian businessmen: Nevzlin, Brodno, Lebedev, Dubov, Golubovich, and the remaining 50% was held by a trust management company, Palmas Foundation, and lastly, Khodorkovsky would hold 10%. Group Menatep Limited owned offshore company, Yukos Universal Limited, which was the majority shareholder in Yukos Oil Company. On the other end, Bank Menatep St. Petersburg was ranked among the 50 fastest growing banks in Russia in 1997. Sadly, this would be short-lived. The Russian state was unable to pay back its debt, thus resulting in the Russian 1998 financial crisis. Khodorkovsky had built an import-export business with an annual turnover of about $10 million. However, due to the financial crisis, Bank Menatep defaulted on obligations and suspended operations. Bulk operations would be shifted to Bank Menatep St. Petersburg, which had grabbed the lender's branch network and card business, and a newly formed trust and investment bank gained the right to deal with most of Yukos' financial flows. Speaking of Yukos, it was facing serious problems of its own, owing to a drop in the price of oil. Though it recovered very quickly, and within a few years would become one of Russia's largest oil companies, as well as being ranked as one of the world's largest non-state oil companies. President Yeltsin's health began to deteriorate. He would resign and Prime Minister Putin would be appointed acting president, and this would later be made official via inauguration in 2000. This would be the beginning of Khodorkovsky's problems. Remember, President Yeltsin was a friend of the oligarchs and allowed them to be somewhat above the law. Upon Putin's arrival, he made it clear that he was no friend of the oligarch and didn't want them to meddle in politics. Grant him that, and he would let you keep your ill-gotten fortune. He wanted to install his policies to make Russia great again. I mean, the country was in crisis just a year prior. Most oligarchs didn't side with Putin's vision and policies. I'll show you how in a moment. Boris Berezovsky, one of the first oligarchs on the scene, had gained a fortune of his own from Soviet-manufactured cars. He was co-founder of another Russian oil company, Sibneft, along with former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. Berezovsky and Khodorkovsky shared something in common. They were both vocal Putin critics. Berezovsky had gained control of Russia's main TV network, ORT Channel 1, back in 1997. He used this TV network as well as other means to spread anti-Putin propaganda. In late 2000, the Russian Deputy Prosecutor General demanded that Berezovsky appeared for questioning. He was abroad when this was brought up. He just never returned to Russia. He would be granted political asylum in the UK. He was later convicted in absentia for fraud and embezzlement back in Russia. Russia never managed to extradite him. I unfortunately can't go into detail because this is a huge topic on its own. I do have a film on him on the channel if you are interested to know the finer details. I do recommend it's a good watch. Anyhow, Khodorkovsky should have paid attention to Berezovsky's situation to see how far President Putin was willing to go, but he ignored this. In February 2003, at a televised meeting at the Kremlin, Khodorkovsky argued with Putin about corruption. He implied that major government officials were accepting millions in bribes. Big mistake. Platon Lebedev, Khodorkovsky's business partner and shareholder in Yukos and Group Menatep Limited, was arrested on suspicion of illegally acquiring a stake in the state-owned fertilizer firm Apatit in 1994. Yes, the one from the Andrei Guryev film. The indictment didn't quite stick. The arrest would be followed by investigation into taxation returns filed by Yukos, and a delay in the Antitrust Commission's approval of its merger with Sibneft. In September, Khodorkovsky went and visited his son Pavel in Massachusetts. At that time, according to his son, his father seemed to be sensing his looming arrest. Little did Mikhail know, his senses were correct, and this would be the last time he would see his son for a very long time. On the morning of October 25th, 2003, Khodorkovsky would be arrested at a Russian airport. He was taken to Moscow and charged with fraud, tax evasion, and other pending crimes. Yes, similar to the ones Berezovsky had been pinned for. The Russian government froze 44% of the Yukos company shares to prevent a group of shareholders led by Khodorkovsky from selling a large stake of the company to the US oil firm Exxon, which had been a pending deal for a while. In preparation for the case, Yukos employees were called in for questioning. A man by the name Pavel Ivlev, a tax lawyer who went along as their attorney, later explained that the officials had illegally interrogated him and threatened to arrest him. Right after leaving the prosecutor's office, the man packed his bags and immediately fled the country. He and his family ended up settling in the United States. I mean, Russia was a whole movie during this period, and Putin was not the kind of guy you wanted to cross. Khodorkovsky's arrest was followed by a more punctual and thorough tax investigation into Yukos in December. How unfortunate. Khodorkovsky was worth $15 billion at this point. Yukos was issued in stages with tax claims for $27 billion, a sum that exceeded its total revenues from 2002 till 2003. The government froze the rest of Yukos' assets and was exploring other ways to settle. Payments in stages or sale of non-core assets were refused or ignored. Starting in 2004, the Russian government organized a series of auctions to sell the assets of Yukos Oil Company, of which Rosneft won the majority. What is Rosneft? Rosneft is a state-owned Russian integrated energy company founded back in 1993. In December, Rosneft purchased Baikal Finance Group, a Russian limited liability company. Baikal would then acquire Yugansneft Gas, a main asset of Yukos, 3 days earlier at a state-run auction for $9.35 billion to satisfy tax debts. This was done through an alleged rigged auction. 2 bidders registered for the auction, Baikal Finance Group and Gazprom, a majority state-owned natural gas company. Accounts from the auction say that the first bid of $8.6 billion came from Baikal. When the auctioneer asked Gazprom Neft to offer its price, a representative of the company asked to make a telephone call and left the room, which was prohibited. When the Gazprom Neft representative returned to the room, Baikal made a bid of $9.3 billion. Gazprom Neft never placed a bid or spoke out. That's how Rosneft won Lugansk and became one of the largest oil producers overnight. By this point in 2004, all members of the board of Yukos and most of the company's senior managers had left Russia, fearing arrest after being, quote-unquote, summoned for questioning by prosecutors. The CFO fled to Houston, the CEO fled to London, the executives Brodno and Dubov fled to Israel in 2003. Nevzlin of Group Menatep reportedly suggested back in 2003 that he and Khodorkovsky should take their money out, flee the country and start a new life. Nevzlin did just that, and joined Brodno and Dubov in Israel. Khodorkovsky felt fleeing the country whilst his friend Lebedev was in jail would have been immoral. The pair's first trial would last 10 months. 10 people affiliated with Yukos, including 2 lawyers, had already been arrested. 9 more had evaded arrest only by fleeing the country. Khodorkovsky and Lebedev would both be declared guilty and sentenced to 9 years in penal colonies. Bank Menatep St. Petersburg would be acquired by its own management team, renaming it as the National Bank Trust later that same year. The new bank planned to continue activities of corporate banking service and services for private clients. Khodorkovsky's lawyer would proceed to announce that his client was no longer a shareholder of Group Menatep Limited, stating that he had pulled out of the company in October 2003, several days before he was arrested. Khodorkovsky held 59.5% of Group Menatep Limited, equaling roughly 26% of Yukos Oil Company, worth $7.8 billion. Shortly after his arrest, Group Menatep pulled its shareholder list off its website. and revealed that Khodorkovsky had handed over control of a special trust that owned 50% of Menatep. Khodorkovsky's lawyer would then state that the prosecutor's step of freezing 44% of Yukos shares could have been unlawful, as Khodorkovsky did not own any shares in Menatep at that point. The new owners of the shares wasn't disclosed, and Yukos' ownership structure was getting murkier and murkier. Yukos executive vice president and Khodorkovsky's former lawyer, Vasily Alexanyan, was arrested just 6 days into his new role, on the 6th of April. It was reported that some individuals would proceed to establish themselves as the new management of Yukos. This was illegal, as Yukos rejected the legitimacy of the new management. The individuals were said to be loyal to Rosneft, and the goal was to dismantle Yukos. They were somewhat successful, as by June 6th, Yukos filed for bankruptcy protection in the United States, estimating its assets at $12.3 billion and its debt at $30.8 billion. Yukos proceeded to accuse the Russian authorities of an unprecedented campaign of illegal, discriminatory, and large-scale tax claims, escalating into raids and confiscations, culminating in intimidation and arrests. To pour salt into the wound, Rosneft would pay $731 million for the transportation of Yukos assets, and by August, Yukos would be liquidated after 3 years of litigation over tax arrears. Rosneft won a number of auctions for the sale of Yukos assets, including 5 refineries and oil companies: Tomsk Oil Company, which became Tomsk Neft, and Samara Oil and Gas Company, which became Samara Neft Gas. They were acquired at a discount of 43.4%. The former assets of Yukos provided 72.6% of oil and gas condensate production and 74.2% of Rosneft's primary refining, making it the largest oil company in Russia. Rosneft's current CEO, Igor Sechin, has been a close associate of Putin, working for him in various departments since 1994. Putin appointed Sechin as chairman of Rosneft in 2004, making him a multimillionaire overnight. In February 2007, new charges of embezzlement and money laundering were brought up against both Khodorkovsky and Lebedev. The Yukos Oil Company's former shareholders and management team filed a series of claims in courts and arbitration panels in various countries, seeking compensation for the expropriation. The largest for over $100 billion was filed at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2007, and resulted in the arbitrators awarding Yukos majority shareholders over $50 billion in damages. The European Court of Human Rights also ruled for Russia to pay the former Yukos owners $2.51 billion in compensation for unfair proceedings of the tax evasion case. Yukos was asking for $333 million to cover losses incurred after its accounts were frozen, plus costs and interest. Khodorkovsky became eligible for parole right after this, though it was denied on the basis that he refused to attend jail sewing classes. On the other end, Vasily Alexanyan was suffering from AIDS and was thus released on bail in January 2009, after being held in inhumane conditions, condemned by the European Court of Human Rights. New charges of embezzlement leading up to a second trial would begin in March 2009 for Khodorkovsky and Lebedev. The trial ended up being a repeat of their original sentencing, just swapped paragraphs. The government alleged Khodorkovsky and Lebedev stole 350 million tons of oil, which his company produced from 1998 to 2003. But this didn't make any sense, because they were already serving time for tax evasion on that oil. So what did they go to prison for the first time, if there was nothing to be taxed? At the end of the trial in December 2010, both defendants were sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for organizing a criminal group in the oil business, embezzling 218 million tons of oil from Yukos oil extraction subsidiary companies. On February 14, 2011, Natalia Vasilyeva, an assistant to Judge Viktor Danilkin, said that the judge did not write the verdict and had it read against his will, alleging that the judge's verdict was brought from the Moscow City Court, basically meaning it was a fixed case. Judge Danilkin responded that the assertion by Natalia was nothing more than slander. Fortunately, on May 24, 2011, an appeal hearing was held for Khodorkovsky. Sadly, Judge Danilkin rejected the challenge. Khodorkovsky and Lebedev were declared prisoners of conscience, as the second trial was deeply flawed and politically motivated. There were prosecutors taking into account the time already served. They were both to be released in late 2016. Prior to their December 2010 sentencing, it was predicted that they might be released by the middle of 2011. However, their new charges had the potential of leading to a new sentence of up to 22.5 years. According to some sources, the second as well as the first case were organized by Rosneft CEO and Putin confidant, Igor Sechin. March 3, 2012, the day after Putin won his third term as president of Russia, then President Medvedev ordered a review of Khodorkovsky's sentence. In December that year, a Moscow court reduced Khodorkovsky and Lebedev's prison sentence by 2 years, so that they were due to be released in 2014. But by surprise, on 19th of December 2013, Putin said he intended to pardon Khodorkovsky in the near future. Putin would actually do so the following day, stating that Khodorkovsky's mother was ill and Khodorkovsky had asked for clemency. Putin also felt that 10 years in jail was still a significant punishment. Some opposition leaders suggested that the upcoming 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi might have played a role in the granting of the pardon. The prison guards told Khodorkovsky to pack his things, and he was flown at once to St. Petersburg, switched planes on a tarmac, and put on a flight to Berlin. Khodorkovsky released a written statement, in which he thanked former German Foreign Minister, Mr. Hans Genscher, who played a critical role in the diplomatic negotiations and securing his release. 2 days after his release, Khodorkovsky appeared at a news conference, reporting he shouldn't be viewed as a symbol that there are no more political prisoners in Russia, adding that he would do all he could do to ensure the release of others. He would acknowledge the support he had received from the Swiss Federal Court, which ruled in 2008 against the release of documents to the Russian authorities that tied him and Yukos to prominent banks and financial institutions. The Swiss court argued that handing over the documents would have endangered his chance for a fair trial. Khodorkovsky also has personal ties to Switzerland, where his wife Aina and 2 of his children reside. He proceeded to apply for a Swiss visa, which would allow him to travel to most European countries. Khodorkovsky arrived in Basel, Switzerland on January 5, 2014, and his close friend Platon Lebedev would finally be released from prison on the 23rd of January 2014. Something quite interesting would occur in 2015. Khodorkovsky applied for political asylum in the UK and has been residing there ever since. That's not what's interesting. The Kremlin summoned Khodorkovsky's father for questioning, and by December, Khodorkovsky too received an official summons from the Russian Investigative Committee. I'm certain he's learned to listen to his friends this time. Putin would have given him life. Seriously, I'm not joking, because the summons would later be escalated to a Russian court issuing an international arrest warrant for Khodorkovsky, whom the Investigative Committee of Russia charged with ordering the murder of Vladimir Putin, the mayor of Nefteyigansk. This one was very interesting. I'll speak about this in the film about Alexei Puchigin, a former manager at Yukos, who has been pinned for multiple murders and is currently serving time for them. Khodorkovsky continues to be a political activist, speaking on the war in Crimea and Ukraine, appearing and winning awards at various events, relaunching the Open Russia movement, with the intention to unite pro-European Russians in a bid to challenge Putin's grip on power, as well as being active in almost all initiatives against Putin. Khodorkovsky's journey from business magnate to political dissident, underscoring the high stakes of challenging the status quo in post-Soviet Russia, his unwavering commitment to democratic ideals and imprisonment transforms him into a symbol of resilience and sacrifice. This is a story of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Feel free to browse more captivating films on our channel.